So, I'm a socialist. Contemporarily, this idea is starting to be viewed favorably by the general public, especially with socioeconomic circumstances pushing it to the forefront of politically relevant topics. Right now, we're living through a second Gilded Age in which an extremely small number of people hold vacuous, absurd, and incomprehensible amounts of wealth that wouldn't be possible without ruthless market manipulation and robber baron thuggery. For those of you who don't know what it was, and I don't expect you to know because American schools typically don't teach lessons of inequality and the struggle of the working class, which would shatter the American dream. During the period between the early 1870s and 1900, America experienced a period of precipitous economic growth in which American wages grew higher than those in Europe, especially for skilled workers, and industrialization demanded a much more Goliath labor force, causing an influx of millions of immigrants predominantly from Europe. And look who's at the center of economic development and quality of life now. But I bet they're not the ones that effectuate social democracy and economic unions. Anyway, real wages grew up to 60% between 1860 and 1890. Conversely, it was also an era of abject poverty and inequality due to the fact that millions of immigrants poured into America, and such a high concentration of wealth resulted in contentious market competition for such jobs. Sound familiar? I'm asking you people in the 21st century. A trademark characteristic of the Gilded Age was the tyranny of robber barons, a socially critical term denoting certain opulent and powerful businessmen at the time who used exploitative business practices to amass their wealth, such as monopolistic control of commodities, lobbying the federal government, monopolizing, and stock price manipulation, not to mention typically paying employees subsistence wages, which is a wage that only provides costs for the basic necessities of life. But now we're lucky if we can even get that. The term is derived from immoral feudal lords who charged illegal tolls on the roads crossing their lands, all to make a quick killing. And as history shows us, patterns in the way people behave when they're insubordinate to certain economic circumstances show up. Monopolization, exorbitant lobbying, and market manipulation are some of the things that are just commonplace in the 21st century, with bootlickers at the ready to defend them. Meet Morgan Zegers, founder of the youth organization Young Americans Against Socialism, which from neoconese to English translates to a trust fund kid trying to let her parents pay their workers less and stop the government from taxing her inheritance. I wonder why it's always bourgeois, 1%er trust fund babies always making the bootstrappy work hard arguments. Here's a thought. Morgan Zegers, opulent from birth, telling the working class that socialism is bad and what you need to do is work harder for your boss so that you'll eventually get paid more. Anyway, let's get into corporatist nonsense.
What the heck is socialism? Good question. It's a good question, Morgan.
Socialism is workers owning a firm via equal distribution of controlling voting shares, and this is how anybody would define it. But I know you're gonna imply the vague abstraction of government doing stuff. Starting an organization dedicated to opposing socialism and not knowing what it is? Typical corporatist corporatocratic move.
Okay, people, let's debunk the most common myths about socialism. Myth number 1, socialism is just the government.
Whoa, we actually agree on something.
Do you know how frustrating it is when I say socialism is bad and then people on the internet say, if you don't like socialism, then say goodbye to your firefighters and roads, lady? Because I'm talking about actual socialism. Socialism is when the government owns and controls the means of production in an economy. The government and its bureaucrats control industries and businesses instead of the people.
Your so-called myth here is when people imply socialism means government, but you then go on to say it's when the government owns the means of production. Not only is my bubble of solidarity burst, but I was right in guessing what you were gonna say, but you're also literally your own example. You're framing as if this person is saying socialism is government, but say in contrast and in contradiction to yourself that socialism is when government regulates the means of production. In a broader sense, it's when the collective owns and operates something, which is typically done via a worker cooperative. State socialism is when the government owns a firm, and I'm fine with some of that in certain regards being a Keynesian, because it would provide increased revenue for the state to spend on welfare and infrastructure improvements, but also set a benchmark for the private sector to compete at. Even state socialism under a republic is still more democratic than a traditional shareholder firm because we elect who makes the decisions in those companies. The post office, for instance, is directly under the authority of the president.
Let's get something straight. Being anti-socialism and against a government with too much power over the people does not have to mean that you are in favor of complete anarchy and no form of government or community organization.
That's right, you're in favor of complete and total corporate control. That's what we call corporatocracy.
Socialism gives power to the people. you know? Absolutely wrong. Socialism is when the government controls everything, but in the name of the people.
Absolutely right. And a worker cooperative, which is the business I want to effectuate, gives people equal stake in that company. They can buy more shares than what everybody else has, and because of this power, each worker gets an equal say in what should happen in that business. The people are the owners, equally. But let's grant your strawman abstraction of what it is and say the state runs everything. Under America's current framework, when we elect represented officials, their platforms reflect what we intend to execute. I'm literally seeing the socialism is when government does stuff fallacy play out right in front of me.
It's a distortion of language. The left does this often. I mean, seriously, have you heard of the People's Republic of China, or the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or the Lao People's Democratic Republic?
A distortion of language when your entire argument misrepresents what contemporary socialists want to effectuate. Almost unanimously, we want to turn all shareholder corporations into worker cooperatives, and you're saying we want the state to regulate everything. No. Now that you've played around with semantics, let me bring up a few deceitful capitalist countries. The Russian Federation, despite the fact that it just encompasses Russian territory. The Republic of Chile under Pinochet, despite the fact that it took a coup for him to get into office. The Republic of Turkey, the least democratic country, the German realm, and the Kingdom of Saudi. Okay, that one's pretty overt. Anybody is deceptive no matter their economics. Let's continue.
It's all a farce, you guys. People living under leftist regimes have no power. Power is truly in the hands of the people when they can succeed and provide for themselves and their families without relying on the system. They can do this on their own. They aren't dependent on a government.
If people who live under leftist regimes have no power, why won't you extend this criticism to capitalist countries that limit their people's freedoms as well? Or is everybody corrupt just a leftist by your standards? And it's funny that you mention people can build themselves up despite the fact that America ranks 27th on the Global Social Mobility Index, with social democracies at the top. In your face, Spain! Suck it, Cyprus. Take that, Poland. Oh wait, they're all capitalist. The fact that you're telling people to work harder and that the system is just fine goes to show you only want to make yourself richer and make them work longer hours without government aid.
Individual economic power equals true freedom.
Let's go through this paper from the Harvard Kennedy School because I know you'll trust a paper from a private university. Quote, in countries rich and poor alike, people alike worry that social programs for low-income households end up weakening work incentives and create an underclass of indigence. In fact, the research suggests just the opposite. The longer families receive stable and predictable support, the better they and their children can do. To determine if social programs lead to dependency or independence, my co-authors and I studied the effects of Indonesia's cash transfer scheme. Program, I can't pronounce that, but it translates to Hopeful Family Program. With the help of the World Bank, the government of Indonesia launched PKH as a large-scale policy experiment in 2008. The program was implemented in 180 randomly selected sub-districts, which were compared to a control group of 180 sub-districts that did not have the program. All told, 14,000 households were surveyed to assess the program's outcomes. In 2011, a study of PKH's initial effects showed that it had a positive impact on short-term indicators of health and educational outcomes after about 2 years. For example, the program was found to have increased visits to postnatal care facilities, as well as their enrollment of children in elementary and middle school. At the 6-year mark, children whose families had regularly received extra assistance from PKH were 23 to 27% less likely than those in the control group to experience stunting, unquote. Reality sways against your perspective, you corporate shill.
Dependent on a government. Individual economic power equals true freedom, and individual economic power is best guaranteed with a system of capitalism and classical liberalism. Myth number 2.
If that's the case, then why do the richest 1% have slightly more wealth than the bottom 99%? How come it would take an Amazon warehouse worker 8 weeks to earn what Jeff Bezos makes in a second? How come we score 27th on the Global Social Mobility Index? Cry about it, Latvia! Emphatically, we're not doing as well as we can in terms of people being able to build themselves up.
Democratic socialism is different, Morgan, because we can elect and choose our leaders. Nice try, but no.
Yes.
A great example of failed democratic socialism is Venezuela.
A good example of failed capitalism is the US, where we've had 48 recessions since our inception. The top 1% are richer than the bottom 99%. 0.6 million people live in poverty. That's 12% of people that reside in America, by the way. Or is that 12% just not working hard enough?
People actually democratically elected the socialist leader into power. Once in power, though, thanks to the socialist policies of the government taking control control of the economy, the centralization of money, resources, and power created an environment of zero accountability, no true system of justice, and plenty of opportunity for corrupt and exploitative behavior.
The only thing remotely socialist Venezuela has effectuated is putting the United Socialist Party into power, and that's it. It was their heavy dependence on oil and deficit spending that got them into this crisis in the first place, and still conservatives vote against globally backed relief aid. But not only this, Venezuela is quitting its socialist leaders and hasn't effectuated anything to further the power of unions and worker cooperatives. Like PragerU, you're pulling BS out of your ass and not citing anything. I am because the axioms of reality sway to my perspective. Venezuela has never been socialist.
Democratically elected socialist leaders quickly turned into a dictatorial regime, and thanks to a corrupted environment created by socialism. Myth number 4. Democratic socialism in America wouldn't make us like Venezuela, a socialist country. It would make us like Nordic Europe, capitalist. Absolutely not again.
This really goes to show how much you want to strawman the Keynesian socialist position. A country only becomes socialist if over half the businesses in that country are employee-owned. It becomes state socialist once half the businesses are owned by the state. It's crazy how you keep on saying socialism is when government does stuff, but when countries with exponentially more welfare policies and government spending than us get brought up as examples, you call them capitalist. The Nordic model is under a market system, but their states are more heavily involved than ours are. It's physiologically impossible for you to not contradict yourself in strawmanning socialism. See my video on social democracy.
There's a big difference between the capitalist social democracies of Nordic Europe and the socialist economy of Venezuela. Venezuela's socialist leaders actually seized the means of production of Venezuela's private economy. The government officials took over private business and industries forcefully.
I'm gonna need a citation for that because I've searched far and wide and literally haven't found anything that says they seized the means of production. Oh wait, it's just another lie. Why waste my time?
Just have huge government welfare programs and a very high level of taxes. These countries still have private business and capitalism. Many Nordic European countries actually rank higher than America on the Economic Freedom Index.
Which is why we want to implement policies similar to the ones they have. See my video on why there's no contradiction between socialism and capitalism.
Number 5. You might be saying, but Morgan, if leftist leaders keep saying we'll end up like Nordic Europe with their version of democratic socialism, and you're saying Nordic Europe isn't socialist, isn't that a good thing? Why are you still rejecting their policies? Because the American socialists are lying to us, and they have repeatedly said they intend to end our capitalist economy.
What?
Policies and anti-capitalist sentiments of these radical leftists are never going to make us like Nordic Europe. They will destroy our economy, transfer power from the people to the system, and contribute to the slow decay and then quick collapse of our country.
What? By raising interest rates, taxing loans, and taxing capital gains more, taxing luxury more, and investing taxpayer dollars into more state-ran businesses, I as a Keynesian want to put that additional state revenue into welfare programs and reparations to financially disenfranchised communities. I also want to institute stakeholder-oriented competition in markets that need the most competition bolstering. This would incentivize innovation, and the funds rewarded would create new jobs. As a socialist, I also think equality is the best way to do business with everyone in a company getting an equal say. Isn't that more meritocratic? In what possible fucking way does this signify me wanting to destroy the economy?
Even organizations like Democratic Socialists of America have put on their website that the long-term goal is to end private business in exchange for community-owned businesses or collectively owned businesses. And remember what I said about those, that it's all just language? This would be in name only.
What you described is literally just a worker cooperative. It's still privately owned, with workers owning the same amount of equity. And just as a little side note, let's do this whole accenting quotation thing. Morgan wants free markets to prosper and wants them to be under a capitalist, market-based system. Call me immature, but it's her antic. I could also use the word radical as a pejorative, but that devalues the actual meaning.
Even worse, they state on their website that they don't actually have a plan to implement this radical change yet, and
I do.
And Who would put that on a website? That would be bad marketing. Their website even says that for now, until they come up with a better long-term solution, their short-term plans will be to increase taxes and regulation to slowly gain control over businesses until they can finally seize full control of them. In the name of the people, of course, you know what I mean? It's fine.
How would raising interest rates and increasing regulations just let them seize control? That's a non sequitur. People like you keep telling them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and to work harder and longer for their bosses. Don't complain. You should just be content with the fact that you even have a job, meaning your labor is replaceable. And the fact that millennials hold less than a quarter of what boomers had when they were the millennials' age. You know, boomers, the generation constantly telling people to stop complaining about what they have, despite the fact that everything was given to them after World War II.
It's fine. Okay, right now, a majority of our generation would choose socialism over capitalism. It's probably because they have heard the false promises of American socialists like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and our peers really do believe that socialism will bring positive change and progress, that it will fight poverty, it will reduce the cost of healthcare, and fix the problems of our day. But that is just not true, you guys. We are falling for it. Hard. We're falling for the lie of the left.
Talk about false promises when the entirety of your ideology propagates working hard, individualistic labor, and the fact that anyone can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, despite the fact that you were born into privilege and statistics decimate this worldview. As if to say, work hard, but don't complain or unionize. Serious problems like 12% of America living in abject poverty, failing infrastructure, wealth inequality, college debt, union busting? No. You gonna make more bootstrappy arguments and deify billionaires? Okay.
And history could not be more clear that this path to socialism is a dangerous one to be on. This obsession with socialism is wasting our time and preventing us from fixing serious problems in America. Together, let's reject socialism and its history of devastation once and for all. And instead, let's meet at the table of compromise and root our problem solving on a foundation of concepts that have proven to be successful: capitalism, individual freedom, and classical liberalism. Thanks, and I'll see you later on another video.
Talks about compromise and then immediately proceeds to mention liberalism, despite the fact that worker co-op socialism is still capitalism because it involves private property, capital accumulation, shareholder ownership, and a market system. Okay then, keep projecting your absolutes onto us. Well, that was one of the lowest effort videos I've seen, and that's saying something coming from me. As you've seen, Morgan strawmans, misrepresents, and demonizes the position that the collective should regulate firms as a whole. She should come back when she wants to refute our actual positions.